From Reddit.com AskReddit subreddit. Police officers of Reddit, what are you thinking when you see cases like George Floyd? I just found out my redneck ex-boyfriend is a cop in a different county. He was a correctional officer, and literally told me he would have inmates beat up by other inmates for fun. He worked in a few prisons. I did call him out on it, and I told him that makes him a dirty CO. I have no doubt in my mind that he would be a dirty cop given the chance. It's a shame too. I respect you so much for what you said. As a black, professional woman, I can't begin to tell you the panic I feel when stopped by the police. I have only had one ticket in the past 20 years. My daughter, a well-educated professional, was stopped by the police for expired tags a few years ago. She was dragged out of her car, slammed her against one of the 6 police cars, her car was searched with sniffer dogs to look for drugs. She doesn't do drugs. They questioned why she had her employer's laptop on the back seat, and they hurt her wrist when they put on the handcuffs. They hurt my whole family. We're still traumatized and we weren't there. The stop happened near her friend's employment, as she was giving her a lift home. A few bystanders came out to look at the scene, and one of them, who knew my daughter, spoke to the cop whom he knew from the military, and that's why she wasn't hauled off to jail for an expired tag. Prior to that year she lived with me, drove my car, and was unaware of tag's expiration. She thought she could go to the end of the month of her birthday, our fault. When I told the people at work about her ordeal the next day, they questioned me with things like, well, what did she do? There has to be something. It's offensive when white people always believe the police over black people. The black people I know are hard-working, most educated people who obey the law and pay their taxes, and mind their business. We never lived in a ghetto or slum, yet we are reduced to second class in the eyes of most law enforcement we encounter. Obviously the voices of Black America are not heard, and it past time for others to step up if they see something wrong. Lastly, I am the daughter of a former law enforcement officer who was brought up to respect the law. I've never broken the law, neither has anyone in the family. I raised my daughters to do the right thing, be considerate of others, and be good Americans. However, relationship has that of a double nature, first a black person, then an American second. I just retired in February of this year. I was a lieutenant and district commander, as well as a defensive tactics instructor for 11 years and use of force expert. Man, these situations are so disappointing for me personally, because I know that you can restrain someone without seriously hurting them in most situations. They had so much time to get the handcuffs on him and let him up, which is what makes me so angry. In my career, I had plenty of fights and very few ever required more than some stitches. In 2 occasions, I had to fight someone with a knife, and they were the more serious injuries. One guy was trying to slit his own throat while in the front seat of a car. I grabbed his wrist and we fought over the knife, and I got cut. He then tried to put the car in drive and I struck his wrist, breaking it. We were poised over a highway, and had he gotten that vehicle into drive, he could have driven onto a highway, which would have been extremely dangerous. My point is that it can be done without seriously injuring or killing someone. As for the protests, I do have issues with all of the police hate over so few incidents compared to millions of incidents where police contact goes as it should. Especially when compared to the extreme violence in places like Chicago, where over 100 people were shot over the Father's Day weekend. Where are the nationwide protests over that violence? I get sick to my stomach when I see asshole cops kneeling on someone's neck like that video. Those abuses should not be tolerated, but it is not indicative of the police all across the country. But I also feel sick when I see people yelling in officers' faces that had nothing to do with that incident in places far away from Minneapolis. And if they want to disband their police force, fine, I'm real sure that should go well for you. But why wait? The MPD should all just quit before their replacements are trained and let the city have what it wants. There is middle ground here that needs to be found. But it will take years for the police and the community to trust each other again. Violence in every major city proves we need police, but we should get the best service we deserve. The only thing that will stop battery, assault, murder, perjury, illegal search, illegal arrests, seizure, and murder by law enforcement is severe and uniformly enforced punishment. Read the research published and you find that a perjury conviction almost never happens, and happens even less when the liar is a prosecutor or a law enforcement officer. This must end. Our overburdened courts and judges would reduce by half to 2/3 over the next 10 years if people knew that even a single count of perjury would result in 1 year in prison and a $5,000 fine. The U.S. needs laws that create a magnifier of 3x any penalty for a lawyer, a judge, and law enforcement officers. They know better yet lie with regularity and wanton abandon. A single count of perjury must result in loss of the opportunity to hold a law enforcement or law license forever. I recently spoke to a prosecutor and a judge about lawyers lying in pleadings, in motions, and at trial. The judge said that everyone knows who the worst liars are and nothing can be done about it. Juries don't know that a lawyer is a habitual liar. Innocent people are spending lifetimes in prison because nothing is being done. The prosecutor shook his head, pursed his lips, put his hands under his armpits, shrugged and said judges won't do anything about it. Nothing changes until people have more to lose by lying than by admitting a mistake. Courts incentivize lying. Almost no one gets caught and even fewer are punished. People who admit a mistake get a lesser sentence. Half the lesser sentence should be standard. It should double if a person causes the expense of retaining lawyers and/or assigning a prosecutor and/or causing the need to begin a local government, state, or federal law enforcement investigation. Punishment should triple with a perjury violation. More than one perjury should quadruple penalties. Lawyers, judges and law enforcement officers should have penalties 3x greater than everyone else. Hello, I will talk about a real situation that I went through. I am not American Girl. When I was 13 years old my family used to live in Tennessee for like 5 years, then we returned to our origin country. During that time, I was walking with 2 of my friends a bit away from my house and having a nice time. I was 13 by that time. Then they asked me to go to a supermarket to get some chips and juice. They gave me their money. But then a horrible thing happened. There was a black man, seems like 33 years old. He was stopped by the police because they thought he was driving while being drunk. There was 2 policemen. The black man was but short and skinny. He couldn't resist them. They kept beating him up and he was cursing them. All I remember is him saying, "Stop treating me like this, I am not the one who arpad your mom." The police officer got really mad and kept beating him and threatening him. I was so scared that I ran away because I thought they would beat me up too for looking at them. I returned to my friends with nothing in my hand but just shocked. They asked me if anything happened or if I was hurt. I said, "There was cops torturing a man on the street and they are so evil, I felt like they are going to hurt me." They were kinda confused and didn't know how to respond. I returned back home. I was too scared to tell my mom because I thought she'd be mad at me for going alone to the supermarket and not taking at least a friend with me. So I kept silent. I still feel guilty for not doing anything to help the poor man. It was a very hard scene for me. I kept silent for too long. After I returned to my origin country, I talked about it, finally. My dad and mom was shocked and they actually got mad not because I went to the supermarket alone, but because I kept silent. But then they forgave me because I was only 13. They were saying, "We hope that this man is okay now and not hurt anymore." I was hoping the same. But I swear if something like this occurs again in front of me, it will make me so mad and I will never be silent again. I will stand with my brothers and support them. Even though I am white, but color doesn't matter. We are all equal and we cannot hide the fact that the black community has a lot of talents, scientists, artists, doctors, engineers and many more. Stay strong. Absolutely sick to my stomach. I'm a lieutenant in my hometown police department. I started my day by showing the video to my officers and making sure my people understood that this is murder, plain and simple. You never, outside of a life and death struggle, do anything like this. George Floyd was handcuffed and on the ground. If he was still struggling badly enough that they felt a need to hold him down, there's 100 ways to do it safely. Use of force should always be as measured and considered as possible. There will always be times where an officer sees danger and has to make a split-second decision without the luxury of weighing the consequences. That clearly was not the case here. He had all the time in the world to think about what he was doing. He had multiple people there telling him to stop. And none of his fellow officers intervened. All of that is why I find this incident particularly disgusting. They had so many chances to do the right thing. Luckily, I have the fortune of working with good people who see this shit for what it is. Before the video was over, before I told them that George Floyd died because of this, my officers were muttering things like, "What the fuck is he doing? You can't do that shit and he needs to get off the man's fucking neck." Made me way prouder to be their leader than any number of arrests they could make to see that their instincts were not to defend the officer. For what it's worth, I'm glad that they were fired. I've heard mention in this thread that one of the officers has been arrested, which is great if true. I hope they're all brought to justice. Their actions, and lack thereof, were completely unconscionable. Retired after 28 years. Nothing less than murder. All the guys I worked with would never have considered doing something like that. You treat combative in custodies once they're secured as human beings. Nothing should be personal. Once they've been subdued and you are safe as an officer, you stand him up, pat him down and understand that your arrestee is at a low point in his life. Give him some dignity and you'll generally get his respect. It works 90+% of the time. That man was subdued and nobody should have been on him at that point. I'm a police officer in California. I am absolutely disgusted by the officer's actions. When someone is in our custody, you must treat them properly. I don't care if they are arrested for murder or forgery. They are a human with a story and they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. I had tears streaming down my face watching the video of George Floyd. We swore to protect our communities and that's what we set out to do every day. Putting a knee into the neck of a handcuffed man for an extended period of time isn't protecting. A man has lost his life due to the gross negligence of an evil person. May he rest in peace. Thin blue line is the core of the subculture. It's basically that all cops will stand together because no one else will stand with them, and if you don't agree then you're not a real cop and not part of the thin blue line. Like the above said, it guides all facets of identity, politics, and general socialization. You socialize with cops and cop families and because they're part of the thin blue line, and it just becomes an echo chamber. When you don't echo what's in the echo chamber you get cast aside, no promotions, your reviews are never favorable, the whole experience is just walking uphill barefoot in the snow without a paddle. My dad did it for 25 years because he was really passionate about making a difference in the community and he found his niche and became so good at it he couldn't be fired, but he had stacks of bad reviews and plenty of promotions he got passed over for. He was a beat cop till he retired. He considered himself part of the TBL but he wasn't really, especially not the same way that these new cops are in the 21st century. My grandfather was NYPD beat cop. Passed over for promotions and refused to have a partner when he could. Said it was because he found out that most other cops couldn't be trusted. He was on the force for nearly 35 years, from the time he got out of World War II to the early 90s. I've got a lot of family history with the NYPD and the FDNY. I had 4 cousins in the NYPD, all of them quit after saying cops are just too untrustworthy to be around. 3 of them joined up the FDNY instead. Now I got 9 cousins, and 4 uncles, on the FDNY, or formerly. I work for a U.S. federal bureau but I'm not a local police officer. All 4 cops need to go to jail. Derek Chauvin, the cop with the knee on George's neck, should have gone to jail long ago. The guy apparently has a history of doing this. This is his 3rd time in 15 years. Black people need to keep fighting and white/Asian/Latino people need to support them. Justice for cases like this won't come easy, and it won't come soon. But if they keep fighting, I truly believe that one day, eventually, it will come. Thao, the other officer shown in the video, has a well-established history of police brutality. He literally stopped a random guy, handcuffed him, and beat the shit out of him. He was fired from the force once already. You know how people say one bad apple spoils the bunch? Welcome to Minneapolis. Half of our police are festering garbage covered in maggots. Look up footage of how MPD officers treated protesters. There's plenty of people who were just as bad as Thao and Chauvin who just haven't gotten caught on tape yet. This isn't oh no, these 3 not bad cops refuse to intervene on a bad cop. They are all bad cops. I wouldn't call myself a local to the neighborhood, but I'm not stranger. I've lived and worked in South Minneapolis. I've stood at that corner dozens of times. I've shopped in that store dozens of times. My job is like 5 minutes down the street from that police station. I know I've repeatedly interacted with Thao specifically, probably Chauvin too, but he's much more generic looking so I can't be sure. There are good cops here. But there are so many bad cops and just mediocre/apathetic/lazy cops. Good cops are definitely the minority. There are good cops here. I've seen them. I've seen the cops who squat down to get on the same eye level as the person in cuffs and talk them down so they calm down. I've seen them explain what they're doing and why. I've seen them use force and immediately back away once the person is restrained. I've seen them have an actual conversation with the person instead of shouting commands, they actually ask questions. But those cops are fucking rare. Mostly it's a cop antagonizing someone while a couple other cops stand a couple feet back. 50-50 chance the cops standing back are snickering to each other. What we saw on video is par for the course in South Minneapolis. That's the only area I'm familiar enough with I feel comfortable to speak on. There's other spots that don't have great reputations either though, the only difference is that this chokehold went on longer and someone died. But everything else, that's not exactly rare to see once you start looking around. A post I can finally answer. Based in Scotland, I'm a police officer with 5 years service, 2 of which I have been a part-time officer safety instructor. During this training we go over retraining subjects and handcuff techniques that we use to a T. This includes all safety aspects including where to apply handcuffs, how tight they should be, ensuring the technique is done correctly and that the subject is in a controlled but safe position. Positional asphyxia is a vital topic we cover, and it is reiterated time and time again that if a subject ends up on the ground, we never, and I reiterate again, never, place any sort of weight on them. Hell, even when sitting in the back of our cars, we watch them and ensure they can breathe and are in a comfortable position for transport. What these cops did was just plain stupid, disproportionate, and frankly an embarrassment to policing. I'd also use disgusting if I'm honest. I just hope that people know we are not like this. Edit. This is my first comment and it has received more attention than I could have imagined, which I thank you all for. To address some points raised in the replies. I appreciate I work in a far different environment, but we still have to restrain subjects while cuffed, and at no point has it resulted in an incident like this or even an officer in the position shown in the video. I absolutely condemn his actions and this should never have happened. As for what was going on his head, I have no idea whether it be red mist or he thought something else. Either way, he should lose his job and face the full consequences of his action. Unfortunately, some hate, as expected, in some replies, which I understand. However, one officer cannot be held accountable for another, so again I hope people understand that this is a small minority of the job and the rest are always there to help. Stay safe, folks. I'm British but live in America. There is such a different mindset to policing back home in my experience, albeit I grew up in the countryside and lived in a quiet city. My friend is an officer today and he was trained to use his words, not his weapons, on first instinct. He said you are supposed to police by consent. It's police service, not force after all. I know Hot Fuzz is a comedy, but when Simon Pegg tells Nick Frost his most important tool is his logbook, it's so true. I never feared the police when we were out and about back home. Probably because your average Bobby doesn't have a gun. In America, I'm not so sure I have that same confidence. Those that join the police to wield power and fear need to be rooted out. Those that stand by and say nothing of their colleagues who do wrong also need to be gone. I'm American and I lived in the UK for a year and couldn't agree more. Police in England were genuinely friendly and helpful. They drive drunk college kids home if they miss their bus. One time they got called on a noise complaint to a house party I was at. They came in all serious, being like, "We've received a noise complaint." Dramatic pause, but I fucking love this song and stayed to dance with us for a minute. It was great. People were even smoking joints nearby and they just told us to keep it down and left. Back in the US, I avoid interacting with the police at all costs. They've assaulted my mentally ill brother, threatened to hold me in jail if I didn't give a statement, lied constantly, etc. I worked as an intern at a state police intelligence operations center. There was always TVs with the news on. I particularly remember when that UPS driver was caught in the crossfire of a needless firefight with police officers and runaways on the highway. Even in an instance like that, the cops I worked with said the same old tropes, "What happened before this?" And the media only covers the bad stuff that happens with cops. What about black on black crime? All the garbage you always hear after this happened right from the mouth of the horse in their state HQ. So to all the cops of Reddit I see on this thread that are saying this is shameful and whenever it happens you all are ashamed and find it disgusting, then hold each other accountable, because in the police HQ I worked at, the culture that allows these things to happen was readily apparent. The experience I had at that internship made me drop any notion of a career in intel and law enforcement because the culture was based on victimization of cops and racism. Do better. Former cop here, was a beat cop for 3 years before I was completely burned out and cynical. Mind you, I came into the field shortly after the tragedy in Ferguson and police/community relations were very damaged and have only gotten worse. Stuff like this is absolutely embarrassing and disheartening. Honestly, the reason I left and went back to the military is not because I didn't enjoy the job, it was because I didn't feel like I could trust my co-workers. I met too many cops, including my training officers, that had egos the size of Texas and no heart for serving the community, or rather they had a very distorted view of what service meant. Too much focus on punishing criminals rather than protecting citizens. I always said my best tool as a police officer was de-escalation through dialogue. Sometimes that's not an option, but I would say 9 times out of 10 the people I arrested did so without any type of resistance. I have the utmost respect for the good cops I met, but they were just too few and far between. It was honestly tiresome to wake up every day and feel like the public hated me and my coworkers couldn't be trusted. Virginia State Trooper here. This is embarrassing and disappointing to still see this type of stuff happening with policing. Stuff like this murder makes it hard for us good cops to do our jobs and gain trust in our communities. I have never been taught while in my academy to place a knee on somebody's neck to restrain them. Especially, when he's already been cuffed. He could have easily been placed in the back seat of the patrol car and held there without any issues. 4 policemen around and they can't figure out what they were doing was all the way wrong. Then they watch him die. This stuff upsets me to no end, and I hope all of the officers involved are tried to the full extent of the law. I have never seen an officer correct another officer even when it's clear that they're doing something wrong. Police seem to have this kind of unspoken law that they're supposed to stick together, no matter if one's being an asshole or clearly in the wrong. Even if they are hurting somebody. Seen that a video of a cop just choking a dude while 2 or 3 dudes stood and watched? Like, do all of the cops on scene have to be dumb? Isn't there like 1 in 5 cops who is a good one? When all of the cops on scene are in on bullshit like this, why should one not expect all cops are like that? Statistics seem to prove otherwise. How many times have good cops stepped in and stopped a beating, an atrocity, a shooting, an escalation from happening? How many times have other cops on scene stayed silent? How many times have we seen good cops from other cities within the state or other states call out bullshit like this? They should have nothing to be afraid of if they're good cops. I'm not saying everyone is a racist piece of shit, but that the system is flawed, that it doesn't allow good cops to do anything. Won't let them speak up, the media will never highlight good cops, etc. etc. I'll let you be the judge of that. And why can't they speak to people like people? Human to human? Why do they always have to speak in that pseudo-authoritarian tone? Australian officer. I, and most of the cops I know, generally operate on a please don't make me manhandle you style of dealing with people. Last thing I would ever wish for a shift is rolling around on THR dirt with other people's fluids all over me. So it involves a lot of tactical communication, and for non-violent crimes where nobody is in any danger, a fair bit of flexibility. If I'm after someone for a $10 shop theft, and he answers the door obviously in a methed up state, I'll generally come back another day unless he really comes down in conversation. Of course, if someone's in danger or someone is on a rampage or something, then absolutely we intervene and make the arrest. But so much of these arrests in the States are for minor or non-violent crimes and the officers are overly principled in the "no, you will immediately come with me immediately." I've probably arrested 50 people in the last 12 months and have not had to use anything but the most minor of physical contact. Sometimes you need to give your weirdo or criminal a few minutes to say his general complaints against the system/world/victim, and then once he's been heard, they, not always happily but obediently enough, walk with me to the patrol car. The taser, gun and spray are for the completely off-tap folk on drink or drugs intending on doing harm, and you know them as soon as you see them, generally. There's always surprises, so we need to be armed, but I generally find if you treat people like humans they act human. Treat them like animals and they act primal. LMFAO. I did police training in South Florida and they love talking about pain compliance and at least said that phrase once a day. Disgusting ass people, trained with them for over a year when I was too young to know any better. So to answer your question, up when I see shit like this I'm not surprised. A lot of the people who are in the force really shouldn't be, so something needs to change. Fast. Kiwi here. If anyone has seen how our police took down the coward behind the 2019 Christchurch shootings, you'd be amazed by the amount of force, or lack thereof, used that resulted in his arrest. In my opinion, it should be the standard that police around the world should use. No one was injured or killed during the takedown despite this guy shooting off live ammunition randomly into the street moments before. The police in America are just something else. They are definitely not behaving like they are there to serve and protect, as the saying goes. My career has been in or around law enforcement for the past 6 years. I'm a 31, black, and work for the public safety department of a big university. Before this job, I worked in juvenile corrections for 5 years. Stuff like this has always been a struggle for me. I obviously feel all of the outrage that comes with being a black person and seeing this go on time after time. I can only speak for the police officers that I interact with. Not trying to be on that not all cops tip, but being at a university, the atmosphere of the place we work at is much different than, say, being a police in a major city. I really struggle internally sometimes, going to work for a police department, and fraternizing with cops sometimes. It's not that I hate the people I work with, the people I know personally are cool or whatever, but even still, I don't know what's on their hearts at all time. Sure, I've never seen or heard of them being racist, but I don't know what they think. With that being said, I feel like I can't be anything more than workplace cordial with the majority of my co-workers. I'm actually at work right now, and at the beginning of our shift this afternoon, a supervisor brought up current events as a reminder to police and security alike to make sure that they go about their jobs the right way. This stemmed from me saying, unprompted, that maybe us doing some community outreach in our limited jurisdiction would be a good thing to do. I'm sorry this has become more of a ramble than answering the question asked. It sucks, man. I don't love the fact that I'm black and have to put on this uniform to pay my rent, but at the same time, all I can do is be my best individually, and hold the people I work with accountable whenever possible. Nothing will happen to these cops. Cops look after their own. First, I had a detective tell me, if he saw a cop commit a crime he wouldn't do anything about it. In the same conversation, he also said that cops should not be held to a higher standard. They demand respect instead of earning it. My ex-father-in-law was LAPD way back when. He was one of the most racist, arrogant boss I've ever met. When I was young I wanted to be a cop. I'm glad I didn't. German cop here. This is the best example for why training cops for a couple of weeks is not near enough. In Germany you have to go through at least 2.5 years of cop school, and alone for that reason, along with a plethora of other reasons, I am fairly certain something like this would never happen in Germany. Active East EU cop here worth 19 years of service. That's murder, and the other 3 former cops are accomplices. Plain and simple. I've had similar situations, albeit very rare, where I had to subdue a resisting suspect while being alone, and of course I had to use force, but not once. Despite adrenaline, the thought of kneeling on his neck never crossed my mind. Kneeling on his back, ribcage, not spine, is more than enough, but even then you don't put your entire body weight. Gradual use of force is what we're taught here since school. We're trained that if you have to use force, you exert it on non-vital body parts as much as possible, especially once you get the suspect on the ground and the potential threat is radically diminished. You're not allowed to use the same level of force as before getting him to the ground, especially once you've cuffed him. Before the pandemic we had regular training sessions, once a week, with our SWAT equivalent. Aikido and Judo techniques are taught as well. Back to topic, in muddy, adrenaline-filled situations, your partner may come close to unintentionally crossing a line he or she shouldn't, and it's your duty to stop them. That's how you protect them both, suspect's rights and your partner's liability. You may get some blowback afterwards, but, if he or she's not a complete moron, will later realize it was a good thing you kept them from crossing the line. The 4th officer had little to no crowd control to do, and he should have determined his colleague to move his knee. First attribute of police is to protect life, and those failed that. I know from experience it's especially tough to be aware of the crowd around you and what your colleagues are doing at the same time, but that's why not everyone can or should do this job. Though in my country we had more than a few cases where, due to angry mob, my colleagues chose to back off and let the suspect go for the time being, despite every single one of them carrying lethal and non-lethal weapons. In every case the suspect was later safely apprehended, and those within the mob who instigated were identified and prosecuted. Don't get me wrong, if someone poses a serious and immediate threat to life, officers or bystanders, we are allowed to use deadly force, but those are very specific cases, few and far between. Also, every police officer has to keep in mind a legal principle: innocent until proven guilty. P.S. More than often we had to keep a suspect from trying to hurt themselves while in police custody. Some recurrent criminals repeatedly incarcerated try that so they can shout police abuse in court. I am the child of a retired police officer who was on the force for 41 years. I grew up knowing his cop friends and believing all cops were good people. In 7th grade I came home from school after an unarmed black man was shot by a white officer. I asked my dad about it right away. There was no way everyone could be right, it must be a misunderstanding, cops are the good guys, but he told me what that officer did was wrong. It never should have happened. It was too much force. That realization shattered my world. I learned that not all cops are good. No one group is all good. It was an insanely hard lesson to learn, but a necessary one. The cop bar down the road from me with sheet paper, thin-ass paper, that has Chauvin's face on it, in the bathroom stall, paper towel dispenser, the dartboard, and stapled to the stools, tells a pretty clear story, as well as the thorough use of all of them. This is why I have a fear of police officers, and I am not even in the vulnerable demographic of police brutality. The fact there is one is actually sickening. The fact that any police force hires people like this without mandatory psychiatric checks is just baffling to me. America either has a laziness problem with backgrounding their law enforcement officers, or they are willingly letting these evil scums run the roost and getting paid to be racist and murderous pigs. What that officer did was a disgusting act of murder. Period. And the bystanding officers that let it happen should also pay the price too. They were an accessory to the crime. I am not a law nut, but this shit has to stop now. I have a brother who is a retired sheriff, and he is one of the meanest, most unreasonable people on this planet. He was also military and has a superior attitude toward women, He has abused his partners, and people of color. Nasty. Sadly, he will defend this cop's behavior. I can tell you this much, for every George Floyd we hear about, I bet there's 5 to 10 more we don't hear about. Maybe not to the point of death but a minimum of severe beatings. Cops beat people up all the time. I think a good start would be the minimum of misdemeanor charges every time the body cams are magically broken, and the possibility for felony charges when they are intentionally turned off. Some may say, woo, that's too harsh. My counter would be innocent until proven guilty, am I right? Before the video came out, MPD has a totally false statement out, about medical distress. There's so many cases where they made it seem like the person died medically. 3 cops beat up my 5'2" plus 100-pound sister because she threw a fuzzy slipper at one of them. The funny part is, she totally deserved to be arrested for what they were there to arrest her for. But because they couldn't control themselves, all she had to do was show up in court looking the way she did and the judge threw it out. Police acting like jackasses doesn't only hurt innocent people, it also makes their own fucking jobs harder. I grew up being told cops are there to help you etc. and now I don't trust them at all. I am a white male and I still don't trust cops. I can't imagine how people of other ethnicities must feel. It makes me sad to see what this country has become. Not one reply in this thread from a Leo that I've seen has called it a murder. I've seen tragedy, and unnecessary loss of life. At this point I've lost confidence that the police even can recognize this criminal murdered a citizen in cold blood. Being police does not absolve you of societal standards, you're held to a higher standard specifically because of the authority you wield and breach of that responsibility is unredeemable and unforgivable. As an European, Italy, who lived a year in the US, I was shocked. I talked about George Floyd at dinner. The response from the people sitting at the table was that's how American police is, and that's not going to change. I'm disgusted and horrified. I can't imagine what would happen if that were to happen in Europe. You know why? 'Cause that shit only happens in the country of freedom. Not a police officer but I deployed twice to Afghanistan. My second deployment we were essentially police with military weapons. We are drilled and taught escalation of force and rules of engagement. If that video was of one of us, we would be in the brig so quick I wouldn't have time to take a shit. Police operate with near immunity, and that's terrifying. Hell, at least it was NCIS that investigated us, not our own guys. U.S. Marine here, we are taught that under the Geneva Convention that if we capture a POW we are to give them proper treatment, food, water, and medical care. You check for weapons, drugs, anything of the like, and after that you take them away for questioning. This is how it should be for civilian detainees. But clearly this officer did not want to be the good guy that day. In my opinion, once you have restrained the guy and checked him for weapons, he's neutralized. Yeah, we are trained to keep a gun on him just to be safe, but in the civilian world in this case, you don't need to prove you're the top man anymore. Once he's on the deck with his hands cuffed and put on his belly, it will prove difficult to get back up, let alone fight back. There was no reason to lay into his neck like that post cuffs, maybe his legs to prevent kicking. But this was uncalled for and I hope that the officer faces charges. For all my fellow US Navy guys on here, can you guys imagine what would happen if 4 MAs on shore patrol killed a sailor coming back from Liberty by pinning him on the ground with his neck for not listening to their instructions? Heads would absolutely roll starting from the top of the MA's direct chain of command and we should expect no less from these police officers and the department policing their fellow US citizens. Yep, this clearly looks like one of those PR threads. When done asking for those feel-good we aren't all bad replies, they'll move on to subs like r/unpopular opinion to post more propaganda. I didn't even have to be American to notice that pattern. Whenever your cops do something bad, there is a sudden flurry of threads on r/all trying to portray them as look guys we are not so bad with cute doggos and feel-good stories on the pics sub until Redditors move on to other things. And the replies in them are almost always suspiciously cookie-cutter, as well as what you call bootlickers desperately trying to defend them. Weird how there's 1,000 cops commenting how horrified they are but 0 officers going on the news and calling for the immediate arrest and charge of murder for the murderer of George Floyd, and manslaughter for the 3 officers complicit in the murder. You know what, I'm going to say something here. There are no good cops. The good cop is a myth. It's a lie. You might see replies below saying how the behavior of these officers was disgusting, embarrassing, they should be punished, they are bad apples. These good cops replying below fund the police unions. And if the cops in the video are charged accordingly or otherwise sued in a courtroom, the police unions will defend them. And they will probably win. These police unions are pure evil, and they're funded by even the nice cops who gave you directions or let you off with a warning or replying below to this post. Good police is an inherent oxymoron. I've seen the videos of police giving their boots to homeless people, but I've also seen Hitler pet his puppy. American law enforcement is such a foundational and institutional clusterfuck that in order for good police to exist, we'd have to collectively redefine what good means. What we understand good to be just cannot exist while attached to a description of police officers. Perhaps they're good at their jobs, but this describes a different type of good. I want to believe there are good police officers, but I cannot find any proof. 93% of Washington, D.C.'s stop and frisk victims wouldn't be black if there were good cops. If good cops existed, the Los Angeles Police Department wouldn't continue their disproportionate searches of blacks and Latinos, even though whites are more likely to carry contraband. I am a police officer in a medium-sized suburban town in Texas. I have been in law enforcement for 14 years. I love my job, I love how I get to help people, and I love how I get to cause positive changes in people's lives. I love how 99.9% of the time, my badge is shiny. Today my badge is not shiny. I am tired of hearing the excuses given by other people for a police officer's misconduct. I am tired of excuses being made for people who tarnish my badge. I am so tired of hearing how officers have a stressful job and their misconduct was a result of that stress. You know who else is under stress? The people who called us, that person whose loved one just committed suicide, the family who called us because they found grandma dead and now we're asking everyone questions, the 7 to 11 clerk who just had a gun shoved in his face, and even the guy we just put in handcuffs and told him he is losing his freedom. Sorry, but our stress is low compared to these folks. We might have to go into these situations, but we get to leave them and pretend none of that shit ever happened after our shift is over. I am tired of hearing excuses for the bad police officers. I am tired of the excuse, well, he puts his life in danger. Sure, I know we put our lives in danger. I've had guns, knives and even swords pulled on me. I've responded to bomb threats, suicidal subjects, assaults in progress, robberies in progress, etc. You know who else puts their lives in danger? Firefighters, deep-sea fishermen, loggers, people who step foot outside their homes in Chicago. We are trained to deal with danger. We are provided with equipment and training to help us survive those dangers. Do I face an increased risk of not going home? Sure, but that's why I am at an increased level of awareness at work, so I can respond to threats appropriately without panic and over-responding. I am tired of hearing about the thin blue line. I believe in the thin blue line. I believe in looking out for my fellow officers. I don't believe in hiding the misconduct or unlawfulness of other officers, and I have always spoken up. What many forget, standing behind the thin blue line doesn't mean concealing the misconduct of other officers. It means confronting those officers so they don't do something to ruin their lives, the lives of others, or violate the law or code of conduct. It means walking up to the officer with his knee on a suspect's neck and saying, "Dude, this is too much, stop," before the officer commits murder. It means walking up to the officer who has been drinking all night and saying, "Dude, I'll give you a ride home." Instead of hiding misconduct, prevent it. Help your fellow officer not do something to ruin his life or another's life. If you do see misconduct, address it, take it to the appropriate level. Stop tarnishing my badge. We took an oath to uphold the law, uphold our ethics and protect our communities. Sometimes that means arresting other police officers or holding them accountable for policy/ethics violations. This officer violated the rights of George Floyd and murdered him through his actions. The officers who were on scene and failed to act are just as responsible. There are multiple videos of this incident and there is no real question as to what happened. For those folks who wonder what makes it murder or manslaughter. Murder is the act of causing death to another human being through an action which a reasonable person would know, or intend, could result in the death of the victim. Manslaughter is the act of causing death through an act which is reckless in nature. Every officer in America is taught about positional asphyxiation, and while some departments allow neck restraints, all officers are taught the dangers of neck restraints and are taught not to apply pressure to the back of someone's neck or head when they are prone out on the ground in handcuffs. Floyd was handcuffed with little resistance and they were able to walk him across the street to a patrol unit. Floyd can be seen in his surveillance video falling to the ground next to the unit on the sidewalk side of the unit. Cell phone footage then shows the officer on top of Floyd's neck on the opposite side of the unit, the street side. There is a random man in the background telling Floyd just to get in the car and he can't win. Floyd can be heard saying he knows and he's done. This implies that Floyd may have resisted or attempted to escape, but was still restrained in the handcuffs. Floyd can be heard multiple times saying he can't breathe. The cell phone video shows the officer kneeling on top of Floyd's neck for at least 8 minutes, with around 4 of those minutes with Floyd being unconscious. Even if Floyd did attempt to resist or escape, there was no reason to hold him down for 8 minutes. What was the point of restraining him for so long? Why did the other officer not assist the primary officer with restraining Floyd so they could get him in the patrol unit quicker? Why did the primary officer continue to restrain Floyd by his neck after Floyd became unresponsive? Why can the officer be heard at some point asking Floyd if he is still a tough guy? I can only come up with one answer to all of these questions, and that was the primary officer, Chauvin, wanted to prove to Floyd that Floyd was not such a tough guy. I see an officer assaulting another human being, going beyond taking control of a suspect, using force as punishment and ultimately causing the death of another human being. I see a second officer who stood and watched and did nothing, despite knowing that what the first officer was doing was a violation of law and policy. I see officers who were trying to get back at Floyd for running his mouth and resisting an arrest by using force they knew could result in death or serious bodily injury in a situation which did not justify using deadly force. This officer committed murder, plain and simple. This officer tarnished my badge and the badges of all police officers. Worst of all, this officer tortured his victim for 8 minutes. Imagine your last thoughts and memories being those of a police officer, a person who the public is supposed to be able to trust, placing his body weight on your neck, slowly asphyxiating you against hot asphalt while he asks you if you're still a tough guy. I hope this officer, and any officer who allowed this to happen, is tried and convicted. It's going to be some time before I can polish my badge back to a shine. In the meantime, a family is suffering, a community is burning, all because of one guy who should have never been an officer. What do I think? I think assholes like this make my job that much harder and damage the trust I work so hard for. I think assholes like this ruin people's lives and ruin families. I think assholes like these should be stuck in a prison with all of the people they ever arrested. Come on people, can't we all just be nice to each other? Any more thoughts?
Please like and subscribe for more videos, and give it a big thumbs up so more people can find this channel.